Good morning, friends. This is going to be very much a part two to a YouTube I just filed yesterday. On the other hand, it is also designed to be standalone. I really like the fighting Quaker image, especially this little guy. He looks so like both weak and strong, right? You know what I mean? He's ridiculous, right? The local school around here at Franklin High School, they circulated the story that Quakers were kind of offended that they were the fighting Quakers, and they've gone to a lot of trouble to change their mascot and so forth. I don't know, man. As a Quaker, I think the fighting Quakers is hilarious, and it wouldn't have offended me had they kept that. But life goes on. So I just wanted to just re-examine a couple of those themes that I brought up in the last video. I had basically two, and I want to tie them together. For example, the fact that the Bernoulli family, and I was talking about Bernoulli numbers a little bit, is anchored in Switzerland. And that's part of my personal mythology too, in that our family name Erner, right, comes from the canton of Uri, Uri, which is in Switzerland. And so there's a Quaker connection there, our being a Quaker family at this point, just our little group, right? The nuclear family. So there's a whole genealogy of Erners. There's a bunch of them out there. Pretty well documented family, actually, as families go. But I wanted to add back to the Quaker thread, too, more about Quakernomics, which is not my invention. Let me scroll down a little further in my blog here. Quakernomics is a fairly recent book, and we also had a group called Quaker Economics, like you could call it an interest group. Quakers know how to do these different kinds of formats. An interest group is one, often featured at annual sessions, but this one was local to our monthly meeting. A guy named Joe Havens started it, and this would have been a fascinating book for us to read, but he died and our group dispersed before this book came out. But briefly, it reviews how Quakerism and British industrialism, the Industrial Revolution so called, Quakers had a big hand in that. And when I talked about earlier Quakers being good at IT, projecting that could happen in the future maybe, I'm kind of drawing on the past when I do that, right? Because I'm talking about, that's Dave Fabic, by the way, good friend. Back to annual session here. There's my mom here. Stuff from the last video I'm going over again. Annual session. That stands for North Pacific Yearly Meeting. So what I'm saying is the Quakers, as a part of their arc, let's scroll back up where I talk about their arc, their sort of story. We're getting to be very successful thanks to industrialization. A lot of big UK institutions, Barclays Bank, Lloyd's of London, these started to be, on the Quaker asset list, you could say. And part of it was they adapted their practices to kind of industrial. They made their way of doing business that it would scale, as we say in engineering. And fixed pricing was part of that. Like everyone pays the same price. Like you could publish your price in a catalog. It wasn't individually negotiated. You didn't like have a special price for the king. Or maybe you did. Maybe you had some different, like, I don't know. It was more rational and less sort of customized in inconvenient ways. It was more industrialized, their way of doing business. And they had a reputation for being honest, keeping the books clean, stuff like that. This is sort of in-house mythology that we tell ourselves. You could say self-serving. But the book, Quakernomics, I just want to say it very much fits my picture in Martian math of doing science fiction in tandem with math, like because you're imagining other worlds. You're really being responsible for or thinking about a whole reality, a culture. You're doing anthropology, kind of like in Star Trek. It's like when you go from planet to planet in Star Trek. That's kind of what it's like to study math in a way. A whole planet, right, comes into view of interconnecting concepts. Anyway, there's these metaphors I like. They actually resonate a lot with what's going on in Urbit. URBIT. I've been talking about that a little bit. Let me also explain in defense of Ada here. This went by on the screen in my last video, but did I explain it? If you go to that Lithuania list, which is public, Math for Wisdom, you can see how I connect the dots in that respect over on that list. But what about here? What am I saying? Well, Ada was the daughter of the poet, right? Lord Byron, Ada Byron. They didn't tell her that was her dad at first. They tried to like hide it from her, and they made it a big deal, like on her 21st birthday or something like this. I read some bio of her that was very fun, very entertaining. Here, though, I was sort of defending her honor, you could say, after a kind of a smear piece on her came up in the New Yorker quite some time ago, 2001. It was suggesting we revisit this idea that she's the first computer programmer. Like, let's not tell history that way. Let's perhaps revise things a bit. And, could have been more tongue in cheek than I took it. Like, I don't know that she needed my defending here, but I had a good time writing this. And the thing is, the tie in is what she worked on was Bernoulli numbers for the Babbage machine. But the Babbage machine was Charles Babbage trying to make an early computer. Like, he had the vision, but it was all based on gears and clockworks kind of stuff, not electronics. So it wasn't really going to fly. They couldn't really manage to make it in his day, but Ada kind of put it in her head. She kind of learned how it worked by going and talking to Babbage and having him explain everything. And then in her notebook, she's trying to figure out the Bernoulli numbers. I've packed out some good YouTubes here on connecting Bernoulli numbers to like Pascal's triangle, and I explain more to the reader what my objectives are. And I confess towards the end that, this is, as usual, a work in progress in this case especially. Because again, I'm not already super up on all this math. I'm more, hey, look, with these tools, armed with these tools, equipped with these tools, you're in a position to go on these adventures, these journeys, more than if you're just stuck with a calculator or something like that. So Adventures in Quakerism, I'll probably call this Adventurism and Quakerism 2. And let's just finish with that utopianism that I'm discussing under the heading of Quakernomics and the company town. See, the idea here was some of these Quaker entrepreneurs, the startups they envisioned, would have included, kind of utopian living conditions, especially by the standards of that day. Workers would have health care, education, and there'd still be profit. It would still work right. It's not like we had to live in this either or world where either the managers or the workers. I mean, what if it wasn't even divided quite like that? What if that classism that's so strong in the UK were broken asunder, right? Is that, quote, socialism? What about employee-owned corporations? There's so many permutations, right? But if it's working for everybody there and like there's no oppressed class, that's what's so threatening to others, because once any group seems to have their act together, then everyone else realizes it can be done in principle. Whereas it's kind of more of a conspiracy, if there is one, to keep everything not working so nobody gets the idea that it even could, right? What's threatening are communities that actually work. And I like to think that Quakers getting into IT, high tech, and all that, with their reputation and their past, are still feeding this kind of realization that we don't have to live in the misery that we do. It's kind of a lot self-inflicted, more than there's any real shortage out there. We're more dramatizing what we don't have than what we really don't have. In other words, we're telling ourselves stories that make it worse in a lot of ways. So there's kind of a psychotherapy angle, I guess, to all of this. But isn't that what religion's supposed to do? Is help us snap out of it. All right. Talk to you next time.